So we're in Hopkinsville.
We are in Hopkinsville.
Tell folks who you are.
Hi, I'm Alissa Keller. I'm the Executive Director of the Museums of Historic Hopkinsville, Christian County. And we're in the basement.
Down in the basement.
We're in the belly of the beast
Belly
down
of the
here.
beast, down with all the artifacts that aren't on display.
all the tough things. We're down here with the furniture and the appliances and the farm equipment.
Well, it's nice and cool down here.
And it's nice and cool down here. Yeah.
I like that, yeah. So, Kentucky, what's your Kentucky connection?
Western Kentucky connection for me.
Yeah. Well, just any part of Kentucky. But yeah.
Well, I always say that my family just grew out of the dirt right here in Western Kentucky, because we kind of did, frankly. I think, like, as far as like personally, we've been here since the last family that came in this area was in the late 1800s. We've been here forever.
Yeah. Okay.
So, like, founding of Christian County on through, that doesn't make us prominent anyway locally, but we. Yeah.
You're important though.
I mean, aren't we all?
Yeah.
So, grew just out of the dirt right here, and I grew up in Hoptown.
Yeah.
Graduated from high school here, went to college, went on a 8-year holiday, and then moved back home to work here at the museum.
You got to leave for a little while to realize that Kentucky is a heaven kind of place.
Isn't it though? I mean, I distinctly remember driving home one of the first times I came back from to town and like coming down off the interstate from a high spot and seeing I think it was soybeans growing, and I was like, these are beautiful, and hadn't really appreciated it. I think having a little distance helps you.
I think sometimes, that's. I moved away for a while, and then coming back, I was like, oh, this is what I've been missing.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know what was missing, but I got here and I was like,
Yes, and I'm a very firm believer in a sense of place.
Yeah. And
I feel like this Hoptown has a very strong sense of place. Sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, I would say.
Yeah.
But all of us who grew up here throughout generations.
Yeah.
It's a unique place. It's a beautiful place. It is a different place. It's a funny place. It's a hard place sometimes.
Yeah.
But all of that, I think, makes for an interesting crop of folks.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of interesting. I mean, traveling the last 24 hours, I've seen a lot and met a lot of interesting people, and
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few people from Hopkinsville.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
Where do we want to start?
You want to start with maybe we start with Bell Hooks.
Sure. Yeah. So
talk a little bit about her.
We have for a number of years, we've always for years and years and years we've said that the most well-known person, most famous person from Christian County was Edgar Cayce, and now I really think Edgar. Yes.
And we'll get to Edgar in a minute. He's very important, but
for sure. But I think now Bell Hooks is.
She's really risen in prominence across the state too. I've noticed, like when I'm traveling, I see her name pop up a lot more than I did maybe 5-10 years ago. And obviously, I wasn't traveling as much then.
Right.
And I feel like recently, especially, and I don't know if that's just because her passing kind of brought a lot more attention to it, or I think it's a comment. I don't know. You can comment on that.
I think it is. I think her passing did bring more attention to it, and in some ways, here I feel. Guilty that we didn't do more, give people their flowers while they're still with us, kind of deal. And I think there was movement in place to start really recognizing her in her hometown, but we hadn't really gotten very far.
Right.
But as far as Bell Hooks, who she was, Bell Hooks. The name is a pen name. It's a pseudonym that she wrote under.
And all lowercase, right?
All lowercase.
I always thought that was interesting.
So the whole story behind that. So she was born Gloria Jean Watkins in Hopkinsville, Christian County in 1952. Grew up here in what would have been an incredibly segregated world. Hopkinsville, Christian County as a whole, but specifically the city of Hopkinsville, is one of the most diverse communities in Kentucky, especially when you're looking at African American population. Now the percentage is less than it would have been 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So especially 150 years ago. But I mean, the city is still 33%. A third of the community is African American, and that is not usual in this part of the state.
Right.
It's not usual in most parts of the state. I mean, obviously Louisville's black population is bigger than ours, but per capita, percentage-wise,
there's a handful of towns where you might see that. I mean, because I grew up in Russellville, and there's a predominant.
Well, and I've always heard in college, I had a history professor that was from Hoptown too, and he said that he described it that like the soil actually in the southern part of the county here into Todd and Logan and Trigg and even Callaway, like, but it's just like this little, that comes up from the south, and it's more like the deep south.
Yeah.
And so farms were big. We weren't growing cotton here, but we were growing tobacco.
Yeah.
And those huge farms that were incredibly manually, like complete hands-on manual labor and very intense.
Yeah.
Needed work and needed hands, and unfortunately those hands were enslaved for the early on, and then probably not paid well, but still, like that plantation culture around here. We don't use the word plantation for whatever reason, but that culture was very prominent. And so then after the Civil War, that some of that continues on, but still the population, actually the black population decreases quite a bit. When we come out of the Civil War, it's more like 50-50. So we do have people who make, like a northern migration, but still leaving a very vibrant, very strong, and very prominent black community. And in some ways, I think that also like allowed them to be more segregated. And that sounds awful and negative, but the black community was almost completely separate from the white community in a lot of ways. There were like some intersections that you were looking in, like domestic workers and that kind of stuff, but churches, schools, businesses, all of that kind of grew out of this. So Gloria Watkins is born as all that's starting to change. So she's in that period of going to segregated schools. And then
keep talking. You gotta look at something.
And then,
keep talking.
And then being on the front line of integrating schools too. Or I don't like to use the word integrating. Integrating to me, I always have to use a hand gesture. To me, and this is just an Alissa definition or interpretation of words. If they would segregated, they're apart. If integrated, they would have brought them together, but they didn't. They like did this, like they desegregated. Like they didn't keep the black high school open and put white students there. They still use the building, but they basically closed the black schools and put the kids there. Like it wasn't a come together happyware.
It wasn't like now when we would like put maybe the city and county schools into two schools, and then people would sort of go to one or the other. And I've seen that across the state where places. I think maybe they took one of the schools and made that the middle school. They all went one place. And it was everybody did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so Gloria Watkins is going to be in that. So our black high school closed. The last graduating class was in 1967. And which I think Brown versus Board of Education is 54. So like schools essentially are being told to integrate. 13 years earlier. So she went to segregated schools when she was younger. She would have integrated. She graduated from school in 1970. So she got both sides of that experience. And now, as looking at it now, that was so much pressure for a bunch of kids. Oh God, I can't even imagine. And by all accounts, Gloria Watkins was a brilliant child. She was a very inquisitive child. She loved to read to the point that like her parents would make her stop reading because she would like stay up all night reading. She shared a room with her sisters, and they'd be like, "Get Gloria to turn the lights off," because she was like always reading. She was always writing. And I think this is like my take on it too. She seemed like one of these that just had like a heightened sense, so she was very sensitive and aware of things. So she graduates, and she's brilliant. And so she graduates from high school and goes to a small college for a little while, and then moves to California. And she starts studying women's studies, African American history study. And becomes just a well-known, very prolific writer on feminism, sexism, racism, and how all those things intersect. She published her first book was a book of poetry that was published, I think, in 1978. Her first book was Ain't I a Woman, published in 1981, and I can't tell you when her last book was published. It was in the 2010s. And she published them right at 40 books in her lifetime. 5 of those are children's books. And they're amazing and also hard still. There's some that one of her, probably her best in her children's book, the title is Happy to be Nappy, and it's about black children and their hair and to be proud of their hair, and very progressive for when she's putting these things out. So she has so many books, so many titles. I have not read any of the hard stuff. But because very academic, academic. Often too referred to as a cultural critic. But anyway, she started writing and started publishing under the name Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is a real person.
Okay.
Bell Hooks, it was Gloria Watkins' maternal great grandmother.
Oh, okay.
So a woman named Bell Hooks lived here in Christian County. She was born she was born free. Like, she was born right after, like, in the 1870s. So, like, Civil War was over. Her parents would have been enslaved. Big family. She marries, has, like 10 children. Her husband was murdered. Bell Hooks' husband Gilbert was murdered, I think by his brother-in-law, and newspaper reports vary. He was
the elder Bell Hooks.
The elder Bell Hooks, yes, Grandma. Granny Bell is how the family refers to her. Granny Bell. And
just trying to keep everything straight.
Yes. Sometimes, you know, I know I know the stories. That
you're good.
But he was described. He was a landowner. He was described in the term mulattoes. He was biracial, very light skinned. And prominent in that community. So then Granny Bell was known as being outspoken. Yeah. She was known as being kind of like a spitfire and feisty. Yeah. And the way that I've been told the story from family members is when Gloria was little, she was also outspoken and feisty, and somebody, people would make comments like, "You must be Bell Hooks' granddaughter."
Oh, okay. Kind of so that ties.
So she like wanted to kind of like live that, breathe life back into her great grandmother, but she chose to use only lowercase. It's talking about like a catch-22 thing, to take the focus off of her, like the work.
Oh, okay.
Her books were not about. She wanted to focus on her work. Right. So like to diminish the self, Right. But then she didn't capitalize her name, and so then that became like an intriguing thing. So then.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, you can understand and sometimes that's what happens.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm going to do this and the effect is
the opposite. I think of what she wanted to do.
But I would say a lot of that's just because of her genius too. Like, I mean, it wasn't just there's a little marketing hook here.
Right.
No pun intended.
Right. Yeah. So, like, she was, but all just fantastic. Like, the body of work that came from Bell Hooks is remarkable. Yeah. And I think some of the focus on her statewide and community-wide too does come with her passing. She passed away in December of 2020 and 21. Right. So I think that there is something to say about that. I also think that she was writing about things in the 80s and 90s that were way out there. Right. Very progressive, very liberal, very forward, and I don't think all of culture is caught up to her. But people I think
the mainstream maybe, or the leading edge of the main. I don't know. I don't know what the way to put it, but yeah. But people are starting to become more conversant in that.
Yes. And so I think that is some of the things she was writing about. People are recognizing. Yeah. In a bigger way. Because some things, like some of the things she wrote about, especially in that like turn of the 21st century, very prophetic about where we are now, like politically and a lot of things, in not necessarily good ways at all. Yeah. So like really, really interesting stuff. Yeah. Like I said, I haven't read a whole lot of her stuff. I've read the children's books.
It's all right.
Smart. But she wrote a book, Bone Black is the name of one of her books, and that's her memoir of growing up here. I think some of it is. It's not straight nonfiction and it's not straight fiction. But it's fantastic. Yeah. And her writing style in it is really good. There are, I think, like 62 chapters, which sounds crazy because they're just these like quick little stories.
Oh wow, yeah.
And they're some are funny, some are hard, some are like, ooh, I don't think you can read that in the classroom. Like some are, because it's about her growing up as a young African American child, right, in this community, and it's pretty profound. So I read that one. Belonging. Oh, it's like everything I love about it. It's a more of like a collection of essays, but it's about a culture of place and how place really roots you.
Okay.
And so she lived lots of places, California, New York. She was a lot of places, but she wanted to come back to Kentucky.
Yeah.
And she felt rooted here. And for a lot of reasons, I don't think Hopkinsville is where she wanted to end.
Okay. Yeah.
So she ended up in Berea
Right.
and connected to the college there and taught there. And
honestly, that's where I first came across her, was traveling through Berea, and didn't really understand the connection to here until recently.
Well, because Berea, I think, in a lot of ways, kind of welcomed and accepted her in ways that this community had a hard time with it for a while.
Well, and that's a big part of not we're here to talk about Berea, but that's a big part of like the founding of the college and everything was, and that whole town is sort of centered around that.
Like, there's such a sense of equality, and she was very connected to the land.
Okay.
It's so funny. So funny to me. On like at a general glance, okay, if you held up Gloria Watkins, Bell Hooks, however you want to refer to her, and my grandfather, not a lot in common.
Yeah.
And the first chapter in Belonging, that first essay, I can't even tell you what it was about. It was about her connection to the land.
Yeah.
I was like, my grandfather could have written this.
Yeah.
Because just that like idea of being rooted in a place and being so good to your neighbors and like this kind of communal sense of things, but like being very independent.
Well, but that makes sense too.
It's like a country folk thing.
Yeah, that she's kind of coming into prominence again too, and for a lot of reasons, but that resonates with sort of what I'm seeing too, or I think we're all seeing, with people wanting to be connected to the land again, knowing where their food's coming from, knowing who their neighbors are. I mean, we lost that for a while for a lot of different reasons. We don't have to explore all that right now.
Right.
But I mean, it sounds like that's something that's pretty forward thinking, in that it looked back, but she also saw that it was coming again. But it's also just a very personal, real thing.
Very personal. Yes, absolutely. She did. She was in contact with Wendell Berry a lot, and there's one of the.
I was wondering, because I hear some. I don't want to say echoes, but
I mean, I think when you describe her as a cultural critic who wrote about feminism and racism and sexism, you don't think of like my grandpa, but like it's kind of this beautiful universal take on things that was coming from an angle, frankly, from a black woman in the 80s that people weren't necessarily used to hearing this way. It's just. I had never heard of Bell Hooks growing up here.
Yeah.
A lot of people say from this area, I didn't know anything about her until college. I was an English major in college and did not know anything about her. So when I moved back here to work at the museum, started to hear little things. But so I mean, playing catch up on that. She did also write 3 books that's often called her love trilogy.
Okay.
And it is kind of interesting to even just like see the titles of her books change. And it was it went from like this heavy focus on all these isms to then this love trilogy. And it's all about love, communion, and salvation are the 3 books. And I mean, then she started looking at like the root of how we could fix it.
Oh, okay.
And like in All About Love, she defines love. Because she's like, we don't have a universal definition for love. Like, people think of it in so many different ways. And to the point that it ends up meaning nothing.
Right.
And she borrows it from someone else, but it's about her, I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but that to truly love, you have to want for your own and for someone else's spiritual growth. And so she talks about her family and how she felt cared for, but finding that, so like her work turns into that.
Yeah.
It's a very, it's profound.
Yeah.
Profound. And she's from here.
Yeah. Well, bring it back to touch on that. So you've got exhibits here at the museum, and talk a little bit about the room.
Okay, so the museum was renovated in 2019. We wanted to have something about her in there. So there's a picture of her in the exhibit. Like very prominently done. And we also have, I don't even know if you saw this. There's a video that runs in the museum.
I haven't seen the video. No.
It's probably, it's one of my, I have a lot of favorite things. It's one of my favorites. So Bell Hook's sister, she has 2 sisters who are still with us, and they both now live in Hopkinsville.
Oh, okay.
And they're delightful. They had a video that their dad took of a parade, African American parade. It was like a Masonic parade in the 60s.
Yeah.
and digitized it, and we let that run on a loop, and she's in it.
Oh, okay.
And so now this feminist who's like known for this iconic picture from the 70s with this afro, like literally she's in like a dress with a crinoline and white gloves waving.
Yeah.
I love it. She hates it.
Yeah.
But and thanks to her sisters, we have some of her personal belongings now on display. And then it was our miss, frankly, when we renovated the building. We had like a nod to her.
Right.
And we've realized since in the past 5 years that we need more.
Right.
So just this year we have taken what was an office that we were calling the community room, and we've converted it into the Bell Hooks Legacy Room.
Yeah.
And it's just like a cozy space is the real thought of it. It is in itself, it is an exhibit, but we want just people to be able to come and sit.
I loved walking in there because I felt like I don't want to say walking into her living room, but because it just felt like I'm in her space now.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, it really did feel like that because there's personal items and there's things that you might not necessarily think of as museum things, but because of the connection to her and what they said about her personality and just how she lived. And I don't want to give too much away because I want people to come see this for themselves, because I think it's important to just come sit on that couch.
Just come sit on the couch.
Sit on that couch and just kind of marinate in it.
Yes, and we have some copies of, when I say her books she published that weren't necessarily her belongings. Almost everything in that room was hers.
Right.
Like the rugs are hers, like the chairs are hers. There are a few things that we added to kind of fill in some space, but it doesn't have anything playing on right now. There's a TV in there so we can show stuff. The TV was hers, like everything in there was hers.
But I think that's cool, and that kind of pushes into the this changing nature of museums anyways. And not to get away from bell hooks, I feel like we can talk about that all day, but like the changing, we've talked about this a lot at the conference, the KMAJ conference recently, about how it's not just a collection of things.
Right.
And I know you guys did a big renovation not too long ago, a few years ago, and really kind of pushed into the direction of not just being, here are things in glass cases, but like, let's get hands-on, let's sit on the couch kind of stuff.
Right. And here are, for a long time, it's not just here, I think museums showed pieces and artifacts that were interesting, just because they were interesting.
Right.
So there's, and we had, frankly, a lot of what we called open storage. We didn't tell people that, but this is big and it doesn't fit anywhere else. We're gonna put it on the floor, like that. What does that tell us about people? And so I think inadvertently we are kind of now like, so we're defining the stories we want to tell, and then how can we tell those best?
Yes.
And one of the ways to tell Bell Hooks' story is to like try to be like immersed in her space, like in her like whole presence in a way, like in her spirit of sorts. One of her great nieces came in recently, and she's like, "Oh, I just love this," and I feel like I'm walking into her living room. And I was like, "Thank you so much."
Yeah, that's
like I've never been to her living room, so we didn't really know. And we had obviously help from the family, but
right.
And we wanted it to still feel like part of the building, but we painted it a different color. We wanted it to be also just like a warm space. And there are people up there right now that love it. Like,
and I was just about to say that the whole, that space especially, because this is an old post office.
Yeah.
And not that it's cold in here, like uninviting, but it's got that old
marble
and all that. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But then you walk into that and it's like this little nook that feels like you're in a different world for a little bit. But even walking into the main gallery now, it doesn't have that kind of cold, distant feeling that some places can have. And I think that's a testament to what you all have done with the storytelling.
And our exhibit, I think when it was created, it was following current museum standards at that time.
Right.
It was dark, and it was almost like foreboding. And museums have just evolved, like everything does. And so we luckily had the opportunity to evolve with it, because we had kind of learned that in our space, the way we could change little things, but the room itself still read the same, and we had to, And so, like I said, luckily we did a big renovation in 2019. Unluckily, we opened
Right for
2 weeks before COVID, but.
well. Yeah.
And so now I'm always like, we just renovated. It was 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, in museum terms, 5 years that's a rounding error.
Feels like yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I love too. You can walk in and talk about storytelling. I was talking to Brett earlier about you can walk in and just kind of choose where you start. There's not a path to follow through the museum.
I mean, there's
sort of.
There's
There's probably a way you want me to walk through.
No, there's absolutely no way I want you to walk through it. If someone comes in is uncomfortable with like, oh, I don't know where to start, it's like, this is kind of the logical path. But like,
yeah,
please walk in and go to what draws your eye. Like that's really the thought. Like, there's not a you can't go to this exhibit until you know what that exhibit. You know, like all the stories connect, and there are actually probably more ways that we like little Easter eggs we put in to connect them that not everyone necessarily notices, but then if people start asking, we can say, oh yeah, this and that, and you know.
Yeah, well, and so like the little aliens popping up everywhere, and so if you come here, folks, there's 6? I don't remember.
Yes, there's 6 individual aliens, and there are 5 in the spaceship, so 11.
Oh, okay, so 11. Well, plus the little guy you can get your selfie with.
And plus the one that over here.
Yeah. So, anyways, there's aliens hidden. You gotta find them.
You gotta find them.
That's part of the fun. So, and it's the common thread. One of the common threads.
Yes.
That runs throughout the museum.
Well,
so why are we talking about aliens?
Well,
why wouldn't we talk about aliens?
Yeah. That's not from here. So Hopkinsville, I had a man come in one time that was from some website, I don't remember, but he said there were places that he called window areas where like the veil was just a little thinner on strange things.
Oh, okay.
And he was like, oh yeah, this is one of those, you know. And
the museum or Hopkinsville or Kentucky? Because I feel like
I think both. Yes.
Kentucky has
me. Yes.
I'm sure everybody's got some stories, but this is a good.
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest stories that I remember hearing about Hopkinsville.
The aliens?
The aliens thing. When I started doing Wandering Kentucky, that kept popping up.
I think we go through phases on what we get known for, and the aliens aliens are hot right now.
Aliens are hot. And then the eclipse kind of got people thinking about weird stuff. And,
yes.
And because, well, we can get into that at a different time because I heard a lot of wild theories about.
I feel like you know things I don't know.
What's going on with the eclipse? But anyways.
So in 2000, just the very small nugget. 2017, the big eclipse, the Great American Eclipse, not the one that just happened a couple of months ago. Hopkinsville, or Christian County, was out in the county, was the point of greatest eclipse. So the eclipse, I think, lasted the longest here.
And was total, right?
Yeah, the longest amount, the longest duration of totality. I think.
Right. We'll go with that.
It's been a day or two.
Somebody can correct us in the comments.
Yeah. But that was on August 21st of 2017. And what is even more interesting is that on August 21st of 1955, on a farm out in the county, there was a big old shootout with a bunch of aliens.
This was north end of the county?
North end, and actually that's where the point of greatest eclipse, on the same spot, but also in the north end of the county. There you go.
Rounding error.
They,
pretty close.
Aliens should have gotten better. I can feel it happening. My accent's going to get stronger when I start talking about
this. That's fine. That's fine. Look, you're just getting into character because this whole thing is such a character-driven story. Like, alien sightings are interesting, but the people that saw it too are part of what makes this story.
Heck yeah. So I mean, like, the way I'm going to talk about bell hooks and the way I'm going to talk about the aliens at Kelly gonna be different.
That's the beauty of telling the story in the museum, right? It's like you just use different voices.
Which personality's coming out now? So it was the evening of August 21st, 1955, on a farm in Kelly.
Okay. Which
at this point, if you are not familiar with Kelly, it's one of those blink and you missed it. Right. You know, so if you take from downtown Hoptown, Highway 41. 41 was it was the main drag between Chicago and Florida before interstate.
Okay.
So 41, busy road for sure.
Yeah.
From here, it takes you to Maxonville, you know. But Highway 41, about 7 miles from where we're sitting,
okay,
north. there's a lot of farmland over there. I don't know exactly. I honestly don't know where the farm was personally. So on a farm, there was a woman named Glennie Langford. She had a number of children that were at the house that night. Her son, whose real name was Elmer, but went by Lucky Sutton. Lucky had come home with his lady and a buddy, Billy Ray and his girl, that they all worked in the carnival. And they traveled.
See, that part's new to me. I had heard this story, but I never heard the carnival part.
Yeah, they worked in the carnival.
Well, and that ties back into one of the explanations.
Yes.
We'll come back to that.
Yes, so they worked in the carnival, but they were, I think they, in the traveling route, they were nearby, so they came, back to Mama's.
Right, yeah, as you do.
As you do, to have a good meal and whatever. And so they're all in the house, playing cards, listening to the radio, whatever you're doing in 1955.
Not drinking, though, supposedly.
Everybody says that Glennie wouldn't let that in her house.
Yeah, so.
Absolutely not. There would have been no alcohol in her house. Now, North Christian is known for moonshine, so whatever. So, Billy Ray goes out to the well to get water.
Yeah.
And when he comes back, he tells everybody that he has seen something in the sky. What does he ever say? With an exhaust, all the colors of the
yeah,
rainbow.
I love this. That's the greatest start to the story. We're going somewhere.
You're going, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
All the colors of the rainbow, and they think he's nuts.
Right.
And so they just, okay, fine. He convinces Lucky to come out with him and investigate. And when they do, they find, they're not described as green, little silver beings, like popping up out of the woods. They're about 3 to 4 feet tall. Their arms reached all the way down almost to the ground, and big ears. And again, as you do, Lucky and Billy Ray go back in the house and grab their shotguns and warfare. And that's dramatic. So
the stories I've heard is not dramatic. I heard that the place was littered with shells.
Littered with shells. They're like young children in the house, and there's all these discrepancies of how many of anything. 12 people in that house that night, and they get them under the kitchen table, and everybody's hiding out. And Lucky and Billy Ray are like popping up, and shooting out shooting through the screen door. There's a hole in the screen door, I think, and having the shootout. They said if they hit one of these little things, it would like ball and roll and be fine. So this lasts for a couple hours. I don't think any of these beings returned fire.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
I don't think they were like.
I don't think they came in peace, though. I don't know.
I don't know. I think they came in curiosity. Anyway,
they found curious folk.
Success.
Yeah.
So this went on for about 2 hours. There is a story about one of them coming out on the porch of the house, and one of the aliens being on the on the roof and reaching down and trying to grab him by the hair. That's the picture of one of them leaning on the porch, pointing up, that made the front page of the newspaper. Not with an alien, but made the front page of the newspaper. Yeah. So after about 2 hours, they load in a couple of cars, all 12 of them, and they hightail it to town and go into the sheriff's office, like just freaked out.
Yeah.
And sheriff's department, police department, we were very close to Fort Campbell, military police, all descend upon the Sutton farm to find out what happened.
Yeah. And
they found a bunch of shell casings and about nothing else. And for a few days, like, people were everywhere.
Yeah.
The family was accused of trying to make money, accused of lots of things. They were all drinking moonshine and drunk, whatever, and they swore up and down that something happened out there that night. I don't know what it was, but something happened.
Well, and part of the reason people think there was something that happened, right, was that it would have been unusual for them to go to the police. I read that somewhere.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
That they were, like, just kept to themselves, I guess. That's the way I read it. And if you have better insight.
And I would say just in general, that's how
most of us are.
Yeah, and country people.
Yeah.
Specifically,
because when they came in too, weren't they? One of them was having like
one of them had his blood pressure was like 3 times what it should be. I mean, like they were visibly shaken. Like they were.
Yeah. They saw something.
Something happened. It wasn't like they were like, all right, y'all, here's what we're going to do. Something happened.
But this comes back to my favorite thing, and I just learned this yesterday about the explanation because of the carnival.
Well, but it wasn't the carnival they were
crazy.
in. So there are different things that have been trying to explain it away. But first they did send in military police. They sent in a lot of investigators. Drawings were done from the descriptions.
Yeah.
There is a Project Blue Book that happened in the 50s where there were all these investigations into these otherworldly experiences. There's a Blue Book report on the Hopkinsville story. Just a few years ago, the History Channel did one of their dramatic shows about Project Blue Book, and there was an episode about Hoptown.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And they took some liberties with what I think the story was, but some of the explanations were that they made it all up, obviously.
Right.
One was that there was a carnival caravan coming through. I don't think it was a train. I think it was like a vehicular caravan, and that there were monkeys that escaped.
Yeah.
That's what they saw. A local journalist, and he had a co-author, they published a book called Monkeys Don't Wear Silver Suits.
Okay.
Because, to dispute that one. Some said that the men encountered very large owls. Owls is another one.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think an owl's going to take a shotgun blast and just roll over.
Roll.
Yeah, man, I don't know. That sounds.
I know. I don't. At some point, I don't know what to think. But something happened out there, and whatever happened out there was very real to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've all experienced something that you're like, I don't know what that was, but I can't explain. Other people are like, hey, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Or you've been drinking.
Yeah.
But you know that both of those things could be true, but also this other thing is true as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I've scoured. So there was one state trooper that went out there that night or the next day that just passed away a few years ago, and he was adamant that nothing happened. But in the newspaper at the time, one of the police officers that was interviewed, it's the very last line of one of the articles that he was like, well, I believe something could have happened because I saw something last year, and it was period, no follow-up.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I mean.
And scouring newspapers, there was some random little mention about a month before about a local man. But I think he was a local veterinarian that had been in a drive-in movie, and he'd seen something real weird. So I don't know.
Oh, okay.
The story is a one-off.
Yeah.
But if you really start picking things together and comparing it to other stories, state and nationwide, it's not really a one-off at all.
Well, and there's so much more we could explore on this, but I want to talk too because one of the things that I learned yesterday was about the Birdcage.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people, and again, I'm not saying that aliens are real or anything like that. I don't know. I will say it. Yeah, there you go. That's fair. Yeah. But a lot of people tie stuff back to the atomic age and wondering if there's some reason that there's. So talk a little bit about the Birdcage because that's something I had no idea about until literally this time yesterday.
Okay, well, I admittedly, it's so funny the things that you don't know.
Yeah, and I don't expect
not
you
you.
to
I mean, the universal you. Yeah. I did not know anything about it either until I moved back here and started working here. And people would, at some point, I think things got declassified. So people were talking about stuff more.
Yeah.
And then come to find out one of my uncles worked there, and I was like, what? This is the most interesting thing I've ever heard about him. Birdcage. So we are very close. Very close. Fort Campbell, which is one of the largest army.
Yeah.
Close to. I mean, it's one of the biggest army bases.
101st Airborne.
Yes, 101st Airborne.
Yeah.
So Fort Campbell. Oh gosh, capsule history of it. It was created in 1942 as Camp Campbell as a. It was actually a tank training camp during World War II. They were training tank units. It was meant to be a training facility. It was kind of decommissioned and then brought back as a permanent installation, renamed Fort Campbell in 1950 or 51. By the mid-50s, the military, U.S. government was looking for, we're in the Cold War by now, and they're looking for places that will be connected to the nuclear system within our country, and Fort Campbell was one of the bases that was chosen. And I don't remember, I'm not an expert in all this, but those sites were all operated by different branches of the military, and the one at Fort Campbell I think was a Navy. So there was a Navy base inside the Army base.
Yeah, sure.
And it was actually, the name of it was Clarksville Base. So Fort Campbell actually encompasses land from 4 counties 2 in Kentucky and 2 in Tennessee. And the bulk of Fort Campbell is in Tennessee.
But it's in Kentucky because
the post office
there
was
you
put
go.
in
That's all that
Kentucky.
matters.
The post office was put in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And so it's Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and it's part of all of us. It's part of Trigg, Christian County, Trigg County in Kentucky, and then Montgomery and Stewart. Is that right? I think in Tennessee. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. So the nuclear weapons holding site was in Tennessee side of the line.
Yeah.
It was called Clarksville Base, and it was a base within a base, and it was a holding place.
It was like what, a third of the nuclear arsenal or
something
something?
like
I mean,
and they kind of like rail lines set up so that they could move things from one of these to the next.
yeah.
There were bunkers built in that from the sky looked like office buildings or like residential structures, but they could hold.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just fascinating stuff. There were both military and civilian employees that worked there. I think anything that, if there was ever time to, like, if any of the weapons were ever actually needed, then there were codes that were military and codes that were civilian, so you had to have both of those in order to pull anything. And I've heard 2 different reasons why it was called the Birdcage.
Okay.
One was because the actual base had, I think, 3 or 5, I don't remember, like different layers of fencing.
Right, that's what I've read, was that there was a lot of fencing.
Like barbed wire, I think
including electric fence,
yes,
yeah.
so that you could not get in.
Yeah.
I've also heard that the actual nuclear whatever pieces were in these cages.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that part.
To keep them steady, and that would somehow got the name there too. I think the actual fencing is the most common.
Yeah.
And it was about a 10 or 12 year period where this was going on, and there are lots of stories that come out of it. Some funny, some fascinating, there's one about irradiated dogs that ended up somewhere. I mean, like some gross, you know. The historian on Post has done a lot of research, talked to a lot of people, and you know, things that it was known that there were like KGB agents in Clarksville and around here. Like, what?
I didn't know that. That's great. So here's a good yarn that I just made this up in high school. I tell people that the Jefferson Davis Monument was a nuclear silo.
And
now I'm like, well, I don't know.
I used to tell, after I found out the aliens, I was like, I think it was like the bing bing that got me.
Could have been. I don't know. It's hard telling. But I just think it's interesting that you had like a third of the nuclear arsenal, but then you had this big kind of event at the same time. Not saying that.
That's pretty bizarre, right?
It's kind of bizarre.
Real weird. Okay. Well, I mean, so at some point, I think people started talking about it again. Like, I've been told now by people who either had parents that worked in the Clarksville base, or I don't think I've ever talked to anyone on the military side, but civilian employees. And I haven't talked to people much. Like, I mean, like little bits and pieces. One woman that her husband worked there. The one woman that I know that her dad, she was like, we knew what time that he left for work at 7. He came home at 4 and he got paid on Fridays. And that's all we knew about the work he did. Yeah. And
I think that's and I think that's something we should explore, like way bigger than we have time for here sometimes. Because it's just like, I don't know how many people. I mean, I travel a lot in this state, and I've read a lot, and I was just like, wait, we had this here. I had.
Well, and so I grew up here in the 80s and 90s. My parents grew up here in the 50s and 60s when this was happening. So, like, when I moved back home in 2012, I started hearing about this. I was like, did y'all know? And they were like, yeah, of course we knew that. And I was like, what?
I love, though, when people are like, yeah, we knew about that. You didn't bother to mention that we had a nuclear arsenal 12 miles from here or whatever it was. I mean, it seems like something would have come up.
I mean, like, when it was coming there, they were like, yeah, your uncle worked there. What? Excuse me? How did I not know this?
Yeah.
But I also think that when people live through things, they're not history because you lived it. And so people don't recognize.
Yeah.
And I mean, some people will recognize that their own lives are interesting.
Yeah.
But most people are like, yeah, I did that. What's the big deal? You know, like they're kind of
Well, I think that's one of the things
dismissive.
that's cool that you all have done too, and it's not a huge part of the museum, but you've got some of the like the 80s nostalgia toys and stuff that I look at and I'm like, no, these aren't museum pieces.
Right.
These are still like in my home.
Well, the only reason they're not in my home is because they're now an exhibit.
Yeah.
So.
Good move. Don't give my parents any ideas. They'll bring you all kinds of stuff.
My parents were very, very happy that when these things came out to go from my parents' house into the exhibit, I think, expressly told, don't bring them back here.
It's a permanent loan.
So now they're mine. Well, we did a fundraiser last year that was 1980s themed. Everything we do here, so the mission of this museum is to tell the stories of this community.
Right.
I think it's beautiful when we can then tell those stories and then how they connect to this bigger web of American history and just like to like a universal human experience. You know, like how we could look at bell hooks or at aliens or whatever and how that connects us to other things. We have this just wonderful, delightful, just brilliant county historian, William Turner, and he's been the county historian since the 1960s.
Yeah.
And he uses the term that Hoptown connection, that there's always a Hoptown connection. And by God, there kind of is always a Hoptown connection. Yeah. And we're also pretty creative, so we'll find it if we have to. But, I mean, you can tell almost any big story of American history through like a local list. And it's so much fun. Being from here makes it more fun, I think. But just being in a place like a small museum, it's so much fun to do that.
Yeah.
And to like try to find that little nugget, you know, like what can I do what can we do to connect this to a bigger story?
Yeah.
And we have these big names like bell hooks. We have a nuclear site. We have, we have those that are like mind blowing.
Right.
But then like even like smaller things that we can try to connect, to people and to different things.
Well, and like us talking about Highway 68, running through the state, and connecting all these places that are connected just sort of intrinsically by this road that's so important, and then being able to share stories based on that, or based on just that shared Kentucky experience.
I mean,
which kind of gets into how we met.
Yeah. Yes.
Because you were up 68.
Not ever realizing 68 went that far.
I know. Well, nobody takes 68 to go up to Maysville.
No. So Highway 6, actually one time, it was years ago, I made this list. It was like the 33 things I wanted to do before I turned 34. So that was 10 years ago now, or roughly. And one of them was to take back roads as often as possible. Yeah. And after driving home...
I can respect that.
After driving back from Charleston to Chattanooga on back roads, very late at night, I said, not doing that one. I did it as often as I can.
Sometimes you just gotta, I hate to admit it, but sometimes you gotta get on the big road.
I mean, there was a moment, it was a friend of mine, she and I were doing this, and there was a moment where we were like, should we pull the ripcord, should we just get on the interstate? And we didn't, and we should have made that choice.
But when you can, getting on those back roads.
Well, it was at night, and at some point at night on a back road's not nearly as much fun. But so one time I was in Lexington, I think, and 68. I was like, I'm gonna drive 68 over there to Hoptown. Yeah. And I did. Yeah. And it was lovely. It was lovely. I think it might have been more lovely if someone else was driving and I was riding. But that's just me being selfish and prissy. Anyway, but didn't drive 68 to get to Maysville, but just what much, like a week and a half ago.
A week and a half, yeah. Feels like
it's progressing quickly.
There's been a lot going on.
There's a lot of very, very good condensed time period here. Yeah. The Kentucky Museum and Heritage Alliance, which it's a nonprofit organization that brings museums from across the state together. Right. Not just museums and heritage sites. So we end up, I think, inadvertently, but also like by default, being a lot of history organizations. But museums come in lots of shapes and sizes. Art museums, children's museums, science museums, zoos are museums. In a different respect. Botanical gardens. There's lots of things. And
I love that it's inclusive in that, so it doesn't have to just be a museum. Well, because there were some people there that weren't with what we would call a museum necessarily. They may have an affiliation of some sort. But
some are like collecting institutions, like an archive, but not a museum. There might not be exhibiting institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Like our local library is not a member, but it would make sense because there's an entire genealogy collection, and so that still kind of plays into the same idea. Local visitor centers and convention and visitors bureaus, that would make a lot of sense. Heritage tourism is a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, and so I mean, like preaching to the choir on that, but lots of different ways that these groups can get along. I think the acronym KMHA is really good for small museums, especially, and there are so many more of us than there are big museums.
Right.
And the whole goal is to advocate for museums, to offer professional development.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things about museums. After I'd worked here for a very short period of time, and was in one of these moments of like stress or whatever, and talking about doing things here. There's my sage of an older brother that was like, she's like, Alissa, I don't think your idea of a museum is the same as the general public's. And I was like, what? Why would what? You know?
Yeah.
And he was like, I think in a very general sense, people think a museum is a place that or like you go once and you see some things.
Right. Yeah.
And then he was like, you're talking about like an educational facility that's like vibrant and always doing new things. I was like, that's what a museum is. He was like, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Right, but we've all grown up with that image maybe from television or whatever, so it's not even our lived experience, but just the shown experience of this very stuffy
or that they're not
space.
for everybody, you know.
Right.
And I think that there's so much dialogue about museums and this evolution of them, but then in some of the small places you're just worried so much with like just doing what you gotta do that this organization gives you that time to breathe and to learn and to grow and networking. And you make friends.
You make friends and you find out that people aren't stuffy.
No.
They're a very lively bunch. But for me, being new to the museum world in the last few months, just learning about how different people do business.
Yes.
And not like in a very like behind the scenes keeping the books way, but just like, what are you doing to be relevant? I mean, that was the conversation that the whole thing was about relevance and accessibility. And for me, that was really valuable. And I guess I would say a little appeal to people, if you're with a group like that, look up the KMHA, or even if you're just interested in it, because there's a lot to be gained by that networking. And like you said, especially with the small museums, where maybe the resources, you may have a resource that we don't have, and vice versa, or just an idea. And
yes, and like also like a level of training and professionalism I meet people through KMHA and other resources all the time where it's like, oh my gosh, you went to school for like collections management?
Yeah.
I don't know any, like
that was an option.
I know.
Yeah.
Kind of jealous, but like learning how other people do some things, or like, oh, y'all are taking this resource and using it whoa, I hadn't thought we could do that, so just like kind of a.
Well, and that comes to, go ahead.
That kind of idea sharing, but then also it's like, oh my God, you have to deal with that too. There's also that part of like, the challenges that.
But that's how I ended up in Hopkinsville then, because we met at the conference, and then you reached out because you had some questions about an event you're doing, and I came here to steal that event from you.
What?
With the Supper Club.
You're stealing it?
Well, we're not going to steal it, but.
Well, no, I didn't really. I thought, I'd say, look, we have a different story, a version of the same story. While we were at the conference.
History has conflicting.
What?
Never would have guessed.
While we were at the conference, we had this great dinner in a house built around 1830.
Right.
Chef Matthew prepared a meal.
Chef Emeritus.
prepared a meal based off of recipes from the 1830s.
Right. Yeah.
And it was delicious and fantastic and also interesting.
Right.
And it's so funny how it was so new because it was so old.
I mean, a lot of things that we don't do anymore that they did.
Well, and after, it ended up the same thing last night. After we talked about it, and it was like, there was no cheese in this meal. Like, what? How is that even possible? So then I come back to Hoptown, riding that, learned a lot of fun stuff, met new people, conference high.
Yeah.
And ramming right into get to work. Like, what are you behind on moments? And we have done now, for about a year and a half, a program we call the Supper Club. that we partner with our local Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
Which is just a great partnership. The intention of it is to bring people together over food, to talk and to break down barriers that might not get all these same people in the room together.
Right.
The intention also is to bring someone from our community
Mm-hmm.
who is of a different cultural background,
Right.
and to have them demo and prep food from that background, and then share that with us. So,
And
like,
what better way to break down barriers than feeding people?
I mean,
that's
feed
always
people.
like, that's love right there.
Amen. Bell hooks didn't define it that way, but that is truly the
Well,
answer.
we all have our own love.
So we've had someone with from Kenya.
Oh wow.
Oh, let's see if I can do them all. Kenya, Japan, Jewish couple
Okay.
came and did traditional Jewish food. Puerto Rican, Indian, soul food.
I heard about the soul food one. Yeah.
The soul food one. And then Barbadian, Caribbean.
Oh, okay.
And then we had one last night,
Right.
in June, and I was underwater on it. We have someone here from Spain,
Yeah.
and she and I've been talking, it just wasn't going to work out, and I was like, "Ooh, what am I
Yeah.
going to do?" And so, which is kind of a normal reaction for me. And so trying to come up with like what we could do so we could still hold the event, make it worthwhile, and make it fit the mission of the museum, the mission of the Human Rights Commission, but also like the idea of a supper club.
Yeah.
And I said, wait a minute. Surely we've got old cookbooks in our collection.
Yeah.
Matthew just did this thing with the old, like, why don't we do this? So I'll reach out to you and let you know we were doing it. So you inspired us.
But in turn, now I'm saying, I called and I was like, we should look at doing something like, because I think it's such a great idea. We had been talking about doing something with culinary tradition anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not open it up to the community in a way that's, and nothing against like big fundraiser kind of things,
Right.
but also doing, yeah, I think there's always that balance of doing the big thing that makes a big splash, but also doing the little thing that brings a lot of people in who may not be able to do that big thing.
Agreed. We're always trying to strike that balance
Yeah.
too. And sometimes in those big things, it's like very elevated food, which is
Right.
fun. Love it.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things when we're talking with people though from other cultures, and I think what we did last night too with that old cookbook, it's like cook what you eat.
Yeah.
Like don't if it's like a special, like we only have this at Christmas, then tell us that. You know,
Right,
like
yeah.
why you do it that way. And last night we did it out of this old cookbook. It's a local cookbook that this woman put together with her like memories, and it was charming and quaint, and we had something I've never heard of from the Ladies' Home Journal in the probably 50s, a bacon and peanut butter appetizer.
It was delicious.
I didn't
though.
get one because I was cooking. Brunswick stew, which is not a fancy dish for sure.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a like what's left over
Yeah,
dish.
that's kitchen sink kind of.
Yeah, but it was delicious.
Yeah,
Thank you,
great.
Mama, for
Yeah.
cooking that.
Yeah.
Homemade cornbread again. Nothing fancy about that.
You didn't even measure everything.
I didn't even measure it. I don't know how. I don't know how.
It was great. Though.
I mean, I know how to measure, but not for that.
Yours is better than the second batch. We'll just leave it at that.
Glad to hear that. Then we had jam cake,
Yeah.
which apparently is like very nostalgic for people. And I have been out since then. I'd seen them before, but I hadn't thought anything about it. I found one of my grandmother's jam cake recipes, my great grandmother's jam cake recipe, and I have zero memory of ever eating a jam cake.
Yeah.
But I made one.
Yeah.
And maybe.
I don't think I had ever had jam cake until like 2 weeks ago, and now I've had it twice in 2 weeks.
What?
I know, it's weird, but
That
it
is
just
weird.
never was something that I grew up with either.
It's a very Christmassy thing. So,
Yeah.
which I was like, oh, I don't know if we should do this in the summer, but we did, and it was delicious. And people even said, like, it felt very nostalgic,
Yeah.
you know. And I made
you nailed it on the caramel icing.
I still can't believe it. I'm real proud of myself.
Yeah.
Made caramel icing for the first time ever in my life in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
I do think it was an easy caramel icing based on how some of the other ladies were
Yeah,
talking.
there was a lot of conversation, which I thought was really cool, though. was
Absolutely.
that people were chiming in their memories and stuff, and they weren't like chiding you for how
No,
you
no,
did
no,
things,
no.
But they were like, "Oh, we did it this way. We did it this way. Oh, this is sort of an easier recipe that I would use." Or the lady
Yes.
was like, "I finally kind of gave in and used the candy thermometer,"
Yes.
which I thought was like, that's an admission for some people.
Well, and then the woman sitting by her was like, "Yeah, I haven't done it yet. You know,
Yeah.
like I haven't gotten the thermometer yet, but I just know what it looks like. You know, so which is part of the whole thing. So there can be some foods that are like foreign to us, but then these are all very comfortable.
They were very Hopkinsville.
And very Hopkinsville.
Yeah.
And very nostalgic, but then also, so her recipe calls for that. Mine, we use this, and it made this conversation, and it was like food's like the great equalizer, like it brought everybody, and then we had homemade ice cream too.
Homemade ice cream. What I think is great too in having those conversations goes back to another conversation we had, which is people seeing themselves in this space. And I know that's an important thing for you to have people be able to see themselves reflected in the museum, but for them to see food that they're like, okay, she's doing what we like, a recipe that we did, but doing it differently, but that's all right because I see myself in it. Now let me tell my part of the story, which is what we ultimately want, is people to be telling their story as well.
I mean, our mission statement, which I will admit is too long, but the intention of it is about stories.
Yeah.
And it's not about like the museum telling stories. It's about the community telling stories.
Yeah.
It's not about us dictating stories. It's about a conversation, and creating a dialogue. Because I don't know everything. You and I just had a different story for this in one
of how we met. I mean, and it was
how you got
it was
here.
10 days ago. Yeah, I mean that's all.
So, like, we want to hear those stories. We want to figure out a way to tell them more, and also to highlight, like we talked about Birdcage and got to Edgar Cayce.
I know we're getting
story.
tight on time, but I definitely want to talk about that here in a second.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But like these big names are what people then hear about from Hopkinsville, and I think that's fine on a big level, But everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And everyone is important.
Right.
And so that woman who made that jam cake every Christmas, I want to know about her.
Yeah.
And what I can't wait to do about this cookbook is there were names given for this family had a cook, an African American woman who cooked for them, different ones I think over time, but there were names given of them, the midwife that like birthed the children.
Oh wow.
Who was also an African American woman, and some other people. So I can't wait to dig into those stories. So then to see how these, and this what talking about bell hook stuff, I had this what was a very segregated community where these places overlapped, and how they did, and how just how all of the Black history is U.S. history. It's all history, and
and even closer, Black history is Hopkinsville history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that history is as much part of like my story and this community story as it is anybody's. And I think it's in true segregation fashion. It has been like teased out, and like we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
It's all us.
Right. Well, I think you see that when you walk into the museum, because there's not one thing that strikes you as being like, this is Hopkinsville right here in this moment, but because the way you see it, you see a lot of different faces and a lot of different facets, and it represents, I'm not an expert on your demographics or your history, but it seemed like you guys represented a lot of different parts of your culture and your history here.
That's right.
All in it, which goes back to that idea of like, maybe you had an idea for a starting point, but start to what draws you in, which I think is the best way to get people into a story anyways. Because it's non-linear.
Right.
There's not we think of history being linear, but it really doesn't work that way.
Time's an illusion.
Yeah, well, I know. I think that's just your excuse to be late.
I'm late all the time. Every day. I look at the clock and I say, I'm not late yet. I'm going to be late. As of this moment.
I know what time to expect you, so you're not late.
There you go. See? People just
just back it up.
I know people have gotten used to me. I have friends that have tried to lie to me. This one friend, man, we were going somewhere, and this is not important to this. And she told me what time I needed to be there, and I'm like, look, I understand what you're doing. And also, I'm smarter than this. Like, I know that it's going to take 2 hours, and you want me there 3.5 hours before. Like, you got to be more subtle than this.
Give me like half an hour. Yeah.
I may always be late, but I'm also not stupid.
Well, I said I have to leave by 1, and we're probably pressing that.
No. Real
That's
close.
Right. I got a minute. So while we got a minute.
So Okay, as like a segue with this, one of the thoughts with this idea of like Black history is Hopkinsville's history, and the more mainstream traditional what we've always told history is Black history. I mean, it's all history, and it's all telling the same story through the bell hooks love books, at least through the Love trilogy. I think even where she's going with feminism and all that as well, and then into the Edgar Cayce. There is this overarching theme of oneness, that we're all in this together and we're all one.
So Edgar Cayce, just give a real quick, like,
oh my god, okay,
I know. Well, I'm just saying, like, give a little introduction and we can talk a little bit about his.
So Edgar Cayce, born in Christian County in 1877, just to give you some kind of time period for him. Grew up on a farm, was considered kind of a bizarre child in a lot of ways, and then figured out as a young adult that he had special gifts, and that he could put himself into a self-induced trance.
Oh, all right.
So he would basically be hypnotized.
Yeah.
He did not necessarily need anyone to do it for him, though. So he could put himself in a trance, and when in that trance, there are lots of different words that are put to explain it. I'm not, I think, qualified to do that. His conscious self would step aside, basically, and his subconscious would go into a superconscious. Yeah, this gets heady, and he wouldn't be tapped into. It's often called the source, but into like a universal knowledge while he was in this trance, and he could do his soul, his mind, his sense, whatever, a spirit could do everything, knew anything you could ever want to know. So when he was in this trance, people could pose questions to him about things, and this source would answer that. When Edgar Cayce woke up from the trance, he remembered nothing. Edgar Cayce was a man. Like, he was just a man.
But he could go into this space where he's a conduit, too.
He was a conduit, yes. Yeah. And he, through those, said all of us can do it.
Yeah.
He was I say he was a man and just a man. He was a very sensitive man and I think he was like a little, kind of like bell hooks. Like, just like, had a little bit thinner skin about some things, and I think was very aware of some stuff around him that other people either have learned not to see or are thicker. I don't know how to say it. Denser. I mean, me too. Yeah. But over time, these trance sessions were called readings, and he gave over 14,000 documented readings in his lifetime. I say documented because many were not.
Right.
It took a long time to figure out like how to make the process work, or it was beneficial and helpful, and all of those things to him and to those who sought help from him. Of the 14,000, over 9,000 of those were health readings. People came to him when they were desperate, frankly, and in bad health. Once people got into it, they would also come to him when they weren't as desperate with just questions, And it was it's like the story's kind of always the same. Like, went to doctors, went to specialists, nobody had an answer, and so then found out about this man who could go into this trance, and I mean, he had like an 8th grade education as a waking, walking around man. But in these trances, he could tap into this universal knowledge. The person did not have to be with him. Actually, it's easier if they weren't. He needed to know where they were. Okay. And there are readings that are given where it's like, they always, he would go in the trance, there needed to be 2 people with him, at least. This is what's figured out over time. One is called the conductor. The conductor is who's talking him through, like asking the questions, because in essence the source only answers the questions that are asked. Pretty straightforward. And the information that's coming out is intense. It is in when I say language, it's in English, but like words that may not be normal, like especially medical terminology.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's something, and so a stenographer needed to be there to take notes, and so it took a while to figure all those pieces out. So when he goes into the trance, they said you had to watch him. He would loosen his collar and his cuffs, and either take his shoes off or untie his shoes. He would lay down and put his hands over his stomach, and they said you had to look at him, and then when his eyelids fluttered, you had to talk to him. Because if you didn't catch him, he'd fall asleep. You just go to sleep. Nap time. And so when like that moment was reached, the conductor would say, "You have before you the body of whoever," and he would say, "Yes, we have the body, and we've had this one before." If they'd done readings from before, and sometimes the source would comment on like what the person was wearing or what the view out of the window looked like, and they could be thousands of miles away. Right. Yeah. And so going through like what was the questions would be posed. The health readings, a lot of times I almost read like I've never read an autopsy report, but like going through all the systems of the body. Oh, wow. He is often called the sleeping prophet because of the work he was doing, but while sleeping, and also the father of holistic medicine, because then the psychic reading would be done, submitted, and it would do like the source of the whatever the complication was and a treatment plan, and those treatment plans were not easy, and they were not convenient either, but they were holistic. So the treatment plan might be changing your diet, it might be taking some herbal supplement or whatever, it might be getting chiropractic adjustments and massages, it might tell you to meditate. I mean, like, so come from a Fulton farm country boy, in Christian County, what, in the 19 teens.
So it's a lot of like unusual kind of
very unusual
ideas. Never mind that what he was doing was unusual anyways, but then his remedies would have been.
And with the yes, and so 9,000 of the, give or take, these are round numbers, of the 14 are health readings. He also did some business readings, some pretty interesting technology readings. There are lots of speculation of who some of his famous clients were, like Nikola Tesla and Woodrow Wilson. I mean, like, sometimes I don't think he even knew who he was doing readings for. Then he also got into what were called the life readings. And I mean, I never want to project that people have to believe all this. I mean, I'm all in though. That it all started with a reading for someone that was a little more metaphysical, and there was this man who'd done a lot of research on metaphysical things, so it was asking different questions because of that. And it was in the 20s when this was, in 1923, Cayce was given a reading for a man, and they said he's been here before as a monk, and they were like, what? And so it started asking more questions, and that the souls reincarnate. And so then he started doing life readings and would get into prior soul experiences that were carrying into this experience, and how that was affecting people, and how it's affecting the people around you. I mean, and Cayce himself had a really hard time with this at first, because of all things, he was a psychic. Yes, he did this. He was also like a trained photographer,
right?
And like the best Sunday school teacher anybody had ever had. When he was a kid, he was about 10 years old when he really started going to church, and like took his family. Like he was like the impetus, for everybody to go to church. And he decided he wanted to read the Bible through from cover to cover every year of his life. So he had to catch up to read it 10 times, and he did every year. He read the Bible.
Wow.
All the way through. And one of the things that burns me about the Edgar Cayce story is when people say it was all the work of the devil, and I'm like, don't put that on him. Do not put this on them. This man, he was doing, everything he was doing was coming from such an honest, helpful place.
Right.
And the means of it may seem crazy and outlandish to us, but to him, he was helping. That's what he was doing. That was his whole goal, was to help. And so he did this life readings. That ends up with whole sets of readings on ancient Egypt and Atlantis. I mean, the whole thing.
So it's
mind blowing. Love it. Which makes my job really fun. So, like, what do we want to tell? Do we want to tell stories in the museum? Yeah, we do. We want to talk about aliens? Got it. You want to talk about growing tobacco? We can do that. You want to talk about psychics in Atlantis? Okay. You want to do like a whole feminist rally? Sure. Like we can do.
You got everything covered.
You want to talk about trains? Okay.
You got that whole. It's not a room, but kind of the nook in the.
That's what I call it, the Cayce nook.
Yeah, and it's all about him.
So, all about him.
And I've noticed that everybody here seems to have a pretty good handle on some of his story.
Some of it, yes.
But there's so many parts to his story too. And I know, like, we could be here forever talking about him as well. And maybe we should be one of these days. We'll just have a whole Edgar Cayce.
Come back. We're gonna do for 30 years the museum has done a Edgar Cayce hometown seminar, and then it was he was born on March 18th.
Yeah.
And it was always right around his birthday. And again, in 2020, I don't know if you remember exactly when everything shut down, but I believe it was March 18th. So we had a seminar planned, and we had a bunch of people coming, and it's so crazy looking back. A week before, I had a board meeting. They said, "Are you going to cancel the seminar?" And I was like, "No, it'll be fine." And then, like 2 days later, I was like, "We can't do this." Like it was all happened anyway.
I definitely remember that.
So we haven't been doing that.
Yeah.
We kind of the next year morphed into something a little different, but we're kind of ramping back up. But next year, I can't tell you the dates, but it's the March 20th to 22nd, whatever the weekend is.
Yeah.
We're going to do a full out Cayce weekend again.
Sweet. Welcome back to that. So we got to talk about one more thing.
What?
Batter.
Oh, yes.
I know. We're running. I've been saying we're running out of time. We just keep going. But at some point, I do have to get on the road. But we got to talk about this because, like, yeah, I know. I wish I could. We're having a ball. But so many people have asked me because I posted a picture.
I know.
I was like, I'm here in the batter capital
of the world.
And maybe this is a good kind of light subject to finish off on.
Now that we've talked about the reincarnation in Atlantis.
Yeah. It's a little shifting gears, but so many people are like, okay, what kind of batter? And why in the world did you pick? And I'll admit, I wasn't sure. I was like, I'm going to go with this, but I don't know what's going on. But now that I understand it, it's kind of fun.
It is. I'm so glad you think it's fun. It is fun. It's a fairly
and it's engaging.
Absolutely, and it's a fairly and it. What's better? It's about baked goods, how
pancakes.
What could be more fun?
Yeah.
It's a fairly new initiative, though, for the community as a whole to be designated as the batter capital of the world. And really what it's doing is taking it's like a big story that has been distilled down into something, for lack of better word, it's very sweet. It connects our agriculture to our industry. When you really get down to Christian County, we're still an agricultural community. Our 4 main crops to this day are dark fir tobacco, which is a very unique way to cure and grow tobacco. And soybeans, which is a newer crop for us, but corn and wheat. Mm-hmm. And we're one of the top producers in the state for both of those, if not the top producer. And I think we grow red winter wheat, which is a soft wheat, and it's really good for baking.
Right.
And the batter capital looks at both the wheat and the corn, but the wheat becomes kind of the focus.
Yeah.
So we grow wheat in the winter and then corn in the summer. Yeah. So that's the first part. We are growing the crops. Growing the first step in the ingredient. Then the next piece are local mills. Yeah. And mills are inevitably, like when a community gets started 200 years ago, you needed a mill. Right. You need to be able to grind your wheat and your corn into something usable.
And you can't drive around South Central Kentucky without hitting some mill road.
Some mill road. And I was just not a smart kid, but I never thought about the fact that these were named that because there was an actual mill. So many mills burned, and it's because it's apparently a very combustible ingredient. Anyway, but yes, mill roads, Cox Mill, Huffman's Mill, Edwards Mill, Barker's Mill, Miller's Mill, those are all ones off the top of my head right here. So we have one actual mill that is still in production that dates to the 1870s. It's Hopkinsville Milling Company. Or it was the combination of a couple of mills that date from the 1870s. The collaboration started in the early 1900s, but still a very active mill. Sunflower products come from there.
I drove by that today.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, that's a cool mural, actually.
Yeah, I got a picture of it.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And it's right on Fort Campbell Boulevard. It's a very kind of iconic piece, and it actually puts a reminder of industrialization and where it used to be in town. Yeah. But mills are our first industry. So Hopkinsville Milling being the oldest one that's still operational. Yeah. And they do, like I said, sunflower products. They do flour, but they're most well-known thing for their cornmeal. Mm-hmm. And the cornmeal mix, and that's what we used to make cornbread last night. So you have that as a product. In the 1990s, Seymour Milling opened a mill here as well. Okay. And they, I don't know what all products they do, but one of the things that we always say is they produce the flour that goes into McDonald's biscuits.
And it's something like every
McDonald's east of the Mississippi River, I believe.
That's what I've been told. Yeah.
So if you get a biscuit at McDonald's from here to the coast, the flour came from here. I would imagine that not all of our locally grown crops are going to those mills, and that they're only getting local, but still they're
Right.
milling things that come from here, and then so you've got those going out as baking ingredients, you
Right.
know. So you start with what comes like the crop to the ingredient, but then we also have the Cresties Company, formerly Continental Mills, which is another one of our industries that's been here for 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
And they make packaged products, like packaged baking mixes. So
Yeah.
Cresties pancakes, they do, you'll see the Cresties name on like, they do a heck of a lemon bar.
Oh, okay.
A lemon bar.
Yeah.
They also do all the Ghirardelli brownie mixes, and those they are a little bit more expensive than other ones, and it's worth every bit of that 50 cents.
If you're gonna buy a box mix, that's
Hands down. They also do the
make your own brownies.
they also do Cheddar Bay biscuit mix, the Red Lobster Cheddar Bay
Yeah,
biscuit
there you
mix,
go.
and it's super good. It's really good in a sausage ball recipe I found. Anyway,
All right.
so all of that is coming out of Cresties Company, and Seymour Milling and Cresties have a partnership. I think it's literally like a big tube.
Yeah, I was
The
told
artery.
there's like just a pipe that goes
Yeah,
from
like an
one to the
artery
other.
that like sends flour over, you know.
Yeah.
So there's that connection. So once we grow it, we grind it, and then we package it
Yeah.
to make batter.
And so batter capital.
It's the batter capital in the world.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, pancakes, brownies. That's also again, it's like such a fun thing. So if we're gonna have an event here, and it's like, what are we gonna do for hors d'oeuvres or desserts? We're gonna make brownies.
Yeah.
Because like you can make a box mixed brownie and be like, this is helping tell.
That's like the
Hopkinsville story.
ultimate thing too, because it's like I can cheat a little bit,
Yeah, cheat a
but I'm
little.
telling my history, so it's fair. Yeah.
And the brownies are super good.
Yeah.
They're so good.
Yeah, I've
So
been known. I've done once in a while. You know, you just got to go for the here down.
yeah,
Yeah.
good. I made some this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were delightful. So that's the batter capital designation is, like I said, a fairly new within the past couple of years. But I know, like here we're especially proud of it because it's not just like one thing. It's like how all of these pieces of who we are as a community come together to make a bigger impact outside of us.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's neat too because now, like, if you're out there in Kentucky, you're gonna walk into your grocery store and see something that's tied to Hopkinsville and to Kentucky, and I think sometimes that's lost on people too.
I think
we'd like to all be eating local and eating, but sometimes that's not the practical thing. But at least we know you're supporting somebody
You
local.
support somebody,
You're
right?
supporting a local farmer by buying these things.
Yeah.
And we won't talk about the other cake mixes out there
I mean,
that aren't from here.
right.
We just don't talk about
What
that.
do they do at cake? They do. I may be wrong, but I think it's 451 different box mixes.
Yeah, I've heard
it's a
that
lot.
it's a number that I was like, oh, I had.
I mean, because I think they make like things that aren't like flour or corn batter based too. But anyway, but still, I mean, it's.
So
it's
come
everywhere.
here, you can get your picture in a big batter bowl.
You can
I
picture
did
it.
that. Yeah.
We have a large stack of pancakes in the museum exhibit. And then we also we call it From Plow to Plate, and it's like a Candyland game that is on the wall. It's magnetic, and you have to pick your weed, and then you have to get it milled and turn it into flour, and you get all your little pieces, and then you have to bake your batter at Mamaw's house so that you can get the batter award at the end.
We're playing that next time I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Game on.
awesome.
The game pieces are all baked goods.
I love it.
Stack of pancakes, a cookie, cupcake, a brownie, and a cinnamon roll. I was like, what's the other one they're found with it?
Well, that's my way of saying I'll be back to Hopkinsville.
I'm always welcome.
I appreciate that, and thank you for spending some time with us here this
Absolutely.
morning.
It's been
Tell
fun.
folks when they can come to the museum.
Absolutely. So the Pennyroyal Area Museum, that is our flagship museum, and it is the one in downtown Hopkinsville, 217 East 9th Street. We are open for the summer, Monday through Saturday from 10 till 4. After August, we're here Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, Museums of Historic Hopkinsville, Christian County, and our website is museumsofhopkinsville.org.
And I'll tag all that in the comments.
Good.
So you don't have to remember it all, but we'll put it in the
I
comments.
talk real fast, but we do our very best to stay active and engaged on social media, posting historic photographs and what's coming up and what we're doing, and we're just so thankful for you and for
Thank you.
us.
And I'll put in a good word because everybody here has been so welcoming for me, answering questions.
You
so
fed us, so that helps.
Well, yeah, that does help. Anyways, All right. Well, let's do it again soon.
Please.
All right.
Love it.
Thanks.
Okay.